well, she's got her bio up here, but to add a little more information, she's on the adjunct faculties of Catholic University, American University, and one more. UBC. Yep. And she is a career coach with multiple practice in all these different areas. And she's going to talk to us today about personal branding, which is probably something that everyone needs to know about. So welcome, Sharrón. Thank you very much for being with us. And the floor is yours.
Hey, good morning, everybody.
Good morning. Good morning. Good morning.
So, reciprocal, quid pro quo, my 3 words, being in the now.
Great.
Being in the now. So, thank you for having me in your space. I appreciate it. And as a facilitator, instructor, I'm all about interactive. So, at some point, my voice is going to sound like a metrodome. And you're like, so that means that you have to talk. How about that? Is that okay? Yeah. So we'll try to make it as interactive as possible. So, and in the spirit of personal branding, I'm just going to start off by giving you my business card. That's part of my brand. And with that, we're clickerless this morning, but Gene and I decided that, you know what, we can make everything work. And my friend in the back there with the camera, so there's really no way we could do this without you getting on camera, right? Okay, I thought I'd ask. You have to ask. I was just kidding. So kind of going with being a part of your personal brand, I think that one should ask for what it is that they're looking to see or receive. So what are the takeaways? Okay, interesting. Maybe I should have. Okay. Something didn't translate. Interesting. Well, don't know what happened in the save, but what I do know is that I know what it is that I want to talk about. So that's a benefit for me. And since you told her no to the presentation, you're going to trust, being in the now, that I am being incredible with my words. So 4 things that I think are important. I read, it's probably last year, a book called The 4 Agreements. And I found that those 4 agreements have transparency throughout life. And the 4 agreements are: 1, be impeccable with your words. The second one is don't take things personally. The third is don't judge. And the fourth is to be your best self. And so I think that has meaning when we're looking at going back into the workforce, if we've been out for a while, or reinventing ourselves in the workforce. How many of you, raise your hand, have been looking for a job for more than 6 months? Okay, and how many of you, when you go and you apply, you think, okay, this is it, I got it, and you don't get it, and then you feel some kind of way afterwards? I'm raising my hand too. And it's normal. So hence the whole don't take it personal. It's not you. It's not like your skills aren't good. It's not like they're not marketable. But sometimes we don't always know what it is that they're looking for. And so we are not the person that they choose. And oftentimes, and one of the reasons that I think I'm good at having this conversation is I worked on both sides. I've been the hiring manager, and I coach hiring managers on how to do better interviews. I've been on the other side where I coach other people in terms of how to get a job and be a better interviewer or interviewee. That's probably a better word, trying to be a better interviewee. So being a better interviewee is showing up and knowing who the organization is, what it is that they're looking for, and how you can put your best self forward and be a problem solver as opposed to the best candidate. Because the job doesn't always go to the best candidate or the most qualified. Oftentimes it goes to the person that they perceive as the best fit. So what do you think that means? What does that mean to you when they talk about the best fit? Yes?
Well, employers have a certain set of things that they're looking for. And sometimes, I mean, the position may have a lot of qualifications and also have a lot of tasks or things that you do in the job, but they may be looking for somebody that's a little bit more skewed in one area or not. So you may be perfectly qualified for the job, but somebody else knows more in one area that they feel they particularly need at that time.
Okay, good point. Someone else? Nana?
Yeah.
Okay.
It could be, I want to say bias in the sense that who would fit in most with the culture of this particular office and environment, you know, and whether the person has a real fluid personality, a real rigid personality, speaks well, maybe has a lot of skills, but maybe very passive or passive aggressive. So depending on that, they may have something to do as opposed to what's just on the resume.
Okay, so Nana brings up a word that I oftentimes hear candidates ask somewhere towards the, typically what happens, and you can tell me if this has been resonating true for you, you submit your paperwork, meaning your resume, your cover letter, and then you get a call, and it's a phone screen where you actually get to go into the organization. So when I'm doing a phone screen, I typically tell you at the beginning who I am, representing the hiring manager, what the organization is looking for. Are you interested? This is the salary range. And that's when they go, money's not that important. I'm really here for the opportunity. And I remind them that they're not calling looking for a job because they want to be a volunteer. This isn't a volunteer position. And I say that to say to you, the looker, have a number in mind. You know what's just not workable for your budget. You have a number, and don't be afraid to own your number. If you know that for your budget, that a job that's paying less than $85,000 a year is just not going to work for you, and they tell you that the max is 60, it's a big gap. So feel empowered to say, thank you, but this isn't going to work for me. You have control. You don't have to say yes and continue with what I like to call the dance. You can end the conversation right there. It's kind of like speed dating, and you can just say, okay, I'm good, I'm done, I'm out. Because they're doing the same thing. The interviewer is doing the same thing. They have, most of the time, they have a budget that they're trying to manage, because that hiring manager, if there's a formal structure, and every organization doesn't have a formal structure, but if they do have a formal structure, formal compensation philosophy, then they have budgets. They have salary ranges for various jobs, jobs, et cetera, et cetera. So one of the questions that they'll ask is, what's the culture like? And I love it when they ask that question, because my response is, what do you need? So when you're asking that question, what are you looking for? What do you want to know when you're asking the question, what's the culture like?
Are you
Yeah.
are you expected to be more than co-workers with the team, or are you expected to be friends,
Mhm.
that kind of thing?
Okay. Ileana? Okay.
I think work life and personal life balance
Mm-hmm.
is something that needs to be considered.
Because that's important to you.
Well, not so much to me, but to other people that I've talked to. But yes, I think it's important that the company have an idea of what they expect in terms of, we don't like to, work late every night or have the employees working consistently. And, that people know when to stop and go on because they have a personal life.
Okay.
The recognition of a personal life, I think, is valuable.
Is that important to you?
Yeah, it's just to...
You can say yes.
Yeah.
You can say yes. And the reason I'm somewhat pressing you on that, if that's important to you, then go ahead and own it. Because some organizations, they don't realize that I'm a manager, my style is I like to work late, come in late and work late, and that may not be your style. You may be a morning person. So if that's important to you, this is a great time to put your cards on the table so you can get a sense of, well, what are the work hours here? So when you're saying, what's the culture like, what you really want to know is, how do you work? What are the teams like? Does everyone in the organization follow the same process, or is each team independent to create his or her own, what do I call it, tribe for that particular team? What else? What are you looking for when you ask for culture?
The type of decision making, so is it more collegial or is it pretty top down?
Good question to want to know. What does the decision making look like? Is it top down? Is my voice actually going to be heard? That's important. And in some organizations, and I tend to be a very transparent person, because if I'm going through all this work and I'm working for an organization, I'm trying to get you in and doing the honeymoon dance to try to get you to come into the organization, I need to be candid with you and say, as an organization, we are pretty, like my last employer, they were pretty fluid in terms of work-life balance. They had half-day Fridays in the summertime. They were off between Christmas Day and New Year's Day. They had dress down day on Fridays. There was something else that was considered a benefit for them. Can't think of anything right now, but those were some of the things. That was the organization, but all of the managers didn't share that philosophy. So you may have been working for a person on their team where they just acted a little bit different. So I'm honest with you, it's like, you know what, this is what the organization looks like, but your boss, for this team, they look like X, Y, and Z. So that you'll still have information so you can make an informed decision. What else would you like to know? You're asking about culture. Yes.
I'd like to know kind of like what the dress code is. Are they in business suits every day? Are they in business casual? Do they wear blue jeans every day?
Yes, that's important. Why is that important to you, Scott?
It kind of depends. Is that a more of a button-down business culture? Is it more creative? If you're dealing with senior executives all the time, you might be wearing a suit. If you're more creative, you might be wearing jeans. Place I worked at, we had a guy come in for an interview. It was a kind of a button-down place, and he had really long ponytails, something like that. Probably not a good culture fit.
Okay.
With everyone wearing short haircuts.
You make a very good point. So I'm going to stick with Scott for a minute. So what is one way for you to get a preview of what that looks like prior to the interview?
Go to the website, read the mission
Yeah, but that only tells you what they publish. What's a better way?
Talk to someone who's in an organization.
Talk to somebody that's in the organization, and what's another great way? Yeah.
Well, there are also sometimes YouTube videos that within like 2 minutes.
If they can, and if they're very progressive, they will create videos from the HR department and put it on their website, which is great, and more of them are trying to get to that point. Some organizations don't have the infrastructure to do it. They're not as creative, and they would like to do it. The benefit of interns, gotta love them. Love me some millennials, gotta love them because they're very creative, and they'll do it for you for the experience. But one of the things that I found is most important is, or effective, I just go by.
Yeah.
Just go by before the interview. I go over and I want to see, how do they treat the receptionist? What does the receptionist look like? How do they treat the maintenance people? Are they treating them like second-class citizens? People meeting and greeting each other. Is everyone walking in with their head down? Are they in business suits? Are they dressed casual? I want to just get a little, that's my sneak preview. And I never tell them. I try to stay out of sight. And then I know. And actually, I've done it pretty much for every person that I've worked for, and it's worked out well for me. So something else to consider. Okay, so what do we want the takeaways to be for today? One, some tips on how to prepare your interview strategy. Two, some tips on what to do in terms of preparing your resume, because that's your calling card. And three, some tips on how to present yourself during the interview. Good with that? Mm-hmm. How are we doing so far? Okay, so why is the strategy necessary? I love this late screen. It's just like so funny to me. But again, it's a good thing that I know what I want to say. So being prepared. So I'm prepared, okay? Doing the same thing all the time, you just continue to get the same outcome or the same results. So you'll have to dig down deep and do something different. I teach an HR Sherron class, Sherron certification class. If any of you have heard background in human resources. And it's a lot of reading, and these are working adults. And for them, you ask, because one of the things I think is very important is if you want to know what someone thinks, just ask them. And they will tell you for the most part. They will tell you if you approach them well and not, get into their personal space. They will tell you. And so for them, it's a lot of reading, a lot of test taking. If you haven't been in class or in a class environment for years, then studying for this 4-hour exam is kind of pressing on you. You're just like, oh, tense. And I'm not a test taker, so I was anxious when I took my test many years ago. So having a strategy is necessary so you know how to approach it. So what are some of the things that you think would be important if you were creating a strategy?
I'm going to say this phrase, and that is start with the end in mind.
Okay.
So, setting that up would be, for instance, you said knowing the particular places you're trying to approach, knowing something about them. That's the fundamental thing. She said mission statement. You said visit the place. I think there's other ways, because a lot of places now, businesses have Facebook pages, so you can see some of the things and or workshops. One of the things that's important to me is, do they encourage further education, and do they foster that kind of leadership development, team development? So those are things that I would look for to be able to know how to start.
And those are the things I consider very important in reading between the lines. Because you're looking for pictures that show that, you're looking for verbiage that kind of promotes that. So you're getting a sense of, regardless of what I tell you, what you see is probably going to speak louder. And then you can ask the question, my favorite question, so what does that look like? When they say, well, we do learning and development, it's great. What does that look like? And then they get to tell you what that looks like. If it looks like you have to be there 10 years and be at a certain level, then I'm at entry level, not going to happen for me anytime soon. Make sense? So ask that question. What else? Yes, Jean.
I use LinkedIn a lot when there's like a job available. I just try to use all my connections.
So what was that first word you said?
I use LinkedIn a lot.
Oh, you use LinkedIn a lot, yes.
Because a lot of the jobs, I heard that you should apply within the first like 3 or 4 days. Because otherwise they're like get inundated. So yeah, I
Exactly.
try to use that as much as possible.
How many of you are familiar with LinkedIn and you kind of, is it a part of your strategy? I had one recruiter tell me a couple of months ago that she's like, it's like a crack. She's like, LinkedIn is crack for her. She's on it every day, a couple of hours a day. And this is a person that is actually looking for various candidates. So they're trolling in a nice way LinkedIn to find people like yourself that have skills and knowledge and experience that they think will be resonant for you. And then they reach out and contact you. And there's nothing wrong with you taking the lead and reaching out and contacting them. So how many of you have decided, I'm not waiting for them to contact me, I'm contacting them? Okay, so what's your approach when you're contacting them?
Do you mean contacting an employer? Okay.
Mainly, I do a lot of arts and education programs. So I have a outline or a blurb about what those programs are, and so I approach the colleges, the schools. I work with various ages and let them know what I have available and when and how I can come in, how would this work for your population, things like that.
Okay. Gail, so that sparked something for you?
Yeah, I think so.
Cool.
I've never, I don't know, I just have never reached out to say, here I am. Hello. I'm interested
So
in me.
something to consider. So instead of, I'll hold that up. Tim. Yes, Tim.
I was going to say that I haven't done it necessarily thinking of a job search, but I have a business that I'm looking for clients to help. And I do reach out to them proactively. I find contacts that know those people, and I learn a little bit about them. And I look at their websites and I contact them and say, here's 3 things that I see that I can help you with. And you try that approach to show value.
What's wrong with doing that for your person? If you were doing it for a business, what's wrong with doing it for yourself? Have you considered that? You are a brand, and you are marketable just like that employer is marketable. So rather than doing a resume, you could send them a proposal statement that this is who you are, this is what you do, and this is what I can do for you given an opportunity. How many of you have done information interviews? So what do you do, Nisha or Nisha? Nicole, neither one. Thank you. Yes, Gail.
Just staying on the LinkedIn, contacting them. How did that work actually? So the organization has a LinkedIn profile. I would post on their profile?
So, I'm gonna pause for a minute, I'm gonna go back over to Jen. So Jen, what are some of the ways that you use
So-
LinkedIn?
I know how to contact individuals.
Yes, so what happens is like, you set up your LinkedIn account for like your key things. So mine is usually operations, program manager, and events. So when that pops up, that looks interesting, I see what connections I have, and depending on who my connections are,
When you say when that pops up, you mean when an opening pops up?
yes.
Oh, no, I know how to do that, but.
But sometimes it's just like also, if an organization's interesting, a lot of them sometimes won't put the jobs up there already. And they might have openings, like what you were saying,
The job proposal.
job proposals.
Mhm.
I usually, like, there are 4 or 5 organizations I work with, and I know kind of their system, so before like they pop up, I say, okay, I'm interested in this type of job, and they said, well, we have like 4 or 5 jobs that are gonna open up in a month, let me tell you about them, and then that way they'll tell
But
me.
whom do you contact? The organization itself or somebody that you happen to know at the organization?
Kind of a little bit of both. I contact the person at the organization, and they sometimes refer me to the person who might have an opening.
So you can approach it, oh, I'm sorry, that's Scott. Go ahead, Scott.
That sometimes you can find out if there's a job that you're interested, you can find out who they might tell you who the job reports to, and you can go in there and look up and say, all right, here's the person, and you can,
I know.
I've done it a couple of times, I reached out to them on LinkedIn, some of them will connect, some of them won't.
Yeah, I know, yeah, I know that.
And Nicole, what were you gonna, or was I calling on you?
Yes.
Okay, so back to Gail, to other ways that you can do that. To Gina's point, organizations don't always know, and sometimes they're in a planning mode. So if they have a pretty decent HR department or a person is leading the HR function, then reaching out to him or her is always a good thing to do, because they're in planning mode. September, excuse me, figuring out when the fiscal year starts for them is another good way to approach it. Oftentimes the fiscal year starts in September or October, and so they are ramping up for, I know this position is going to come online because then I'll have money to fund it. So I take you back when I first moved here to DC. This was the first time I moved to a location where I did not have a job. Normally my companies moved me. And a friend that I worked with previously said, you should try DC. And I'm like, yeah, it's cold. She's like, no, it's not Glendale, Mendoza, because I came the first year of that huge snowstorm. I'm like, somebody wasn't paying attention to Mother Nature, okay? So I was certainly not liking life. But long story short, I knew the work that I wanted to do. I worked in human resources for the private sector, and I intentionally wanted to work in the nonprofit. So I started looking for nonprofits. I came across this opportunity. And then I saw that a friend of mine, and actually she was my neighbor in Atlanta, knew the person, the president, and they had gone to a leadership symposium some years back. And so I reached out to her. She gave me an introduction to him. I reached out to his administrative assistant, who then turned me to the hiring manager for that position. And you never know where it's going to end up. So that, and then the end of this story, long story longer, did I get the position? I did.
You didn't even know they had a position?
I knew they had an opportunity. That part I did know. So that took me on that journey.
Yeah.
But sometimes you can do it when you don't know that they have an opportunity. And I think that's a bit riskier, and it could be perceived as a lot of legwork for you. But if you're doing it in a lot, I won't say a lot, but in multiple buckets simultaneously, you never know which one is going to hit for you.
This might be taking a step back from where everyone else is here, but if I don't know how to define myself on something like LinkedIn because I really don't know what I want to look for yet, that's problematic. And also, I was joking, I would still take a job as an attorney. I think it's harder for me because I've been out for so long, I haven't found anything. So, I mean, I want to keep that option, but I don't want to just label myself attorney because I'd also be willing to do something like grant writing or whatever. I mean, because I have the same skills and they're transferable even if I don't have the experience. So I'd like to be able to say something on LinkedIn that would be something that would give the idea that I'm willing to do more than being.
So my recommendation for that is when you're creating your LinkedIn profile, to let that be the headline, the skills that resonate with you doing grant writing, the experience that you have that resonates with grant writing, sell that as opposed to your legal skills. That doesn't say that you overlook them because you've probably spent years building up that skill set, but they're not the primary.
Okay, so rather than using the noun like attorney or whatever position,
exactly.
use the
exactly.
Argue.
Exactly. Gina.
So, I'm sorry, your name is?
Gail.
Oh, Margaret. Okay, so Margaret, if you want to do grant writing, we're at the Foundation Center. They
I
just
know,
have a lot
I've
of
come here
good things.
before, yeah, I think I might look into that, but I don't know
And
for
I'm
sure
sure
that I
you-
want to do that.
No, I've taken several classes on it, and it's always good if you want to go into nonprofit, that it's like a little bit of everything,
Mhm.
and grant writing is always big.
And
Yeah,
so
yeah.
sometimes if we haven't been in the space yet, we have some of the requisite skills for it. So while we're out creating our next move, getting a certification in something is helpful, because then we can add that to our portfolio. So it's really about building up your portfolio, building up your personal brand so that you can sell those things. And when you're submitting that cover letter, I know some employers, they just tend to be stuck in that traditional format, and they are married to that chronological resume. They want to see where you were from November this year to that year. It's like, oh, it's so hard to get them away from that. But I'm going to keep trying, because I think, it's just me, that the functional resume that allows me to see the skills and experience that you have is more important, and I can figure out later how long you've been there, okay? Because when you fill out the application, that's where the rubber meets the road. Because if you are not factual, this is what I like to use, if you're not factual in the application, there's a little bitty line at the bottom that says, I agree that the information that I shared here is blah, 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 blah. So you get to get that information there. And if they're going to do reference checks, and many of them do, and right now reference checks are basically, because we're living in such a litigious society, dates of employment, last salary, bing, boom, bang. That's all you want to know. And if you can answer honestly to that, or factually to that, you're good. You're golden. Does that help any?
I guess so, yeah, it's hard to know how to approach the job search, since I don't really know particularly what I want, but I guess if I just reword what I have on LinkedIn, that will help.
That's a great start. And then look at other people's profiles. Now, I don't encourage you to people to copy verbatim someone else's profile on LinkedIn. It's like, well, you know, that person is on LinkedIn and they're going to know, Sharron, that you copied them verbatim. That's not the smartest move, Sharron. But it'll give you an idea of how you want to brand yourself. Now,
I wanted to say it's similar to working in the arts predominantly, casting is an issue. So if somebody wants to be cast as a dancer, they don't give their musical resume. So what I was going to say to you, if attorney is not what you want the foundation to be, that's like your last resort, then as you make a determination what you want, then I think starting with the skill set, as she mentioned first, in terms of what it is you want to focus on, so that they'll quote cast you for that as opposed to what you don't want to do.
The other thing I think with attorney, in anywhere in your profile, they immediately will come back, they can immediately come back with overqualified.
I
Which
know, I
also
don't like
means,
that.
which also means,
Typecasted.
which also
Yeah.
means too old, you know?
Yeah.
so we underplay those things, overplay the things that we want them to focus on. And I always recommend that people have more than one resume.
But on LinkedIn, you can only have one profile.
Well, on LinkedIn, you can only have one
So-
profile, so make it be the profile that you're focused on. But when you're submitting your resumes, you're submitting your job proposals to other organizations, there's nothing wrong with having more than one and letting it focus on the opportunity that you want. And I know it seems like a lot more work, but there are 3 areas that I'll use myself as an example. Equity and inclusion, HR strategy, and leadership coaching. Those are the 3 foundational pieces. And so if someone were to say quickly, well, you got a resume? I have one in those 3 buckets that I can just automatically send them. If you look at my LinkedIn profile, it's a combination of a little bit of all of that. And then I get to sell myself based on what it is that I want to do and what it is that they need. And I will continue to say this. When you're looking for a position or looking to link up or align yourself with an organization, present yourself as a problem solver. It's not about you. It's about what you can do for them. It's all about what you can do for them, Jean.
An HR person once told me that they have a headache and we are the aspirin.
That's the great one, yes. Yes. They have a headache and we are the aspirin. Yes, that's a nice way of framing it up. Because they want to know if you can solve their problem. And not long term, but quickly. You know, when people are using that terminology, hit the ground running, they truly, truly mean that. But in the interview, you want to ask them, well, my favorite question, what does that mean for you? Because it could mean different things for different people. So know thyself, internal examination. So back to Margaret, who are you? And what is it that you really want to do? What is it that's something that you want to do that you want to get paid for?
That's the hardest part of the job search for me, because I don't know,
Okay.
you know?
Okay. So have you considered sitting with someone and just helping you brainstorm what that looks like? And 40 plus is probably, they have someone here that can help you with that. Am I right, Eric?
Well, that's what we ask people to do in the class, is spend 4 weeks thinking about
That's usually something that you want
what
to
it
do
is
prior to
they
asking.
want
Yeah.
to do.
Have you done any grant writing per se?
No, I'm sure it could. because
I would find, I would go to her event, and then I would go to a nonprofit or just make some connections and volunteer to do a grant.
That's what I thought it was.
Yeah.
Then you had a track record, you find out whether you like it or not.
Everybody one time, he's giving us some good feedback.
So-
But
One of the best things you can do to develop skills is to volunteer with an organization and start developing those skills in that context.
Yeah, I think I'm at that point.
yeah, volunteering is not a bad word. It helps you build skills, and it also helps you build connections. So that's a way to expand your network. So when I talk about know yourself and your internal examination, who's on your board of directors? You have a personal board of directors. Who's on your board of directors? Think about it for a minute. Who do you have that will give you honest, candid feedback? Who do you have in your Rolodex, your contact? I'm sorry, Rolodex is like really old, huh? Yeah, go ahead, I'm a little bit older. Not much.
We're 40 plus.
So you know that we're
40 plus. We're all of us are 40 plus. That's the only number we need.
Okay. So who's in your contact list that can give you candid feedback? Who's in your contact list that can introduce you to someone that's in the area that you want to be in? So when you're actually having that exploration of, having that moment of silence to contemplate, I've been doing this for a minute. What else do I want to do? So my true story. And part of this whole job search thing is know your story and be able to sell your story. And that's what people are looking to hear. They want to know your story. And everybody has one, and only you can tell your story the best. I can't tell your story. I can tell my story, but I can't tell yours. But I'm very interested in yours. So when I first moved to DC, recently got laid off, but I moved anyway. Crazy. Like, who does that? When I first moved here, I lived in Rockville, and I worked in Crystal City. And I took the metro because driving would just make me an angry person, and it's not going to look pretty. So I was like, we're going to take the metro and save people. And there's a map on the metro, and there's this diamond. For those of you that know the city, not geographically challenged, but it's the area that's inside DC. And I would say all the time, I want to live inside the diamond. I probably said that every day, subconsciously, consciously, I want to live inside the diamond. 3 years ago, I moved inside the diamond. So I'm inside the diamond, I go for a run, that's my way of clearing my head. And I'm running on the wall, and I get to this area because I'm geographically challenged and I need to run the same way or I'll get lost. And I knew in my mind, it's like, well, if I go that way, I have to go up that hill. And I didn't want to go up another hill because my legs were getting tired. And I overshot it and I had to do the hill. And I'm like, doggone it. And then I stopped. And at that moment, in the now, it came to me, that's what your life is like. You think it's going to be, you go to school, you get your degree, you do everything that's planned out for you, and you think you're on this trajectory and it's going to take you one way, and then life shows up and it just blows it all out of the water for you, and you have to make different turns. But then I realized, I'm not lost. I'm not lost, Sherron. I'm just taking a different route. So I stopped, collected myself. It's like the capital's over here, you live over there somewhere, you know how to get home, find Union Station, you'll be okay. And by the way, I decided I'm not running up the hill, I'm walking, I can take my time. And so I walked up the hill. So I liken that, my analogy is that that's what life is like. We have an agenda, it's planned out, but life might show up and give us a curveball, as some people like to say. And so you just create another plan. But you have to know at the end of the day, what is it that you truly, truly want to do? And for many of us at 40 plus, having a traditional job is not necessarily going to be it. Daniel Pink wrote this book. It's called, give me a minute, what's the name of that book? Oh, I wrote it down. Yes. Who knew it? Knows it?
I don't know, I know Daniel Pinkwater, but maybe it's something
Yes, so
different.
he wrote a book called Free Agent Nation, basically talking, are you familiar with it?
No.
So basically, in Free Agent Nation, he's talking about the fact that many of us are going to move from having those traditional jobs, because getting a job at 20-something, 30-something, and having it for 25, 30 years and getting the golden parachute when you retire, that's passé. That's gone. But being a free agent, maybe you'll have multiple things that you're doing. Okay, and you get to decide if you're getting that. Ileana talks about work-life balance is important to her. Well, if you work for yourself, you can do that. And it's not that I'm advocating working for yourself. You get to decide what that actually looks like for you. If you want to work for yourself, you want to work part-time and then work for yourself. Your work life can look a lot of different ways, but you have to decide what it's going to look like. But more importantly, once you decide what it is that you want to do, then you want to look at the external market and see what they're selling. So if I truly wanted to be, when I first moved here, becoming a leadership coach, I thought, I learned about coaching and thought, well, I think I'm good in that space. I've been coaching informally for a while. I think I could probably do that. But I needed some formal training, back to what I said, so maybe I would get some additional training in being a leadership coach. I was fortunate enough, the employer that I worked for, they didn't pay for it, but they allowed me the time away from work so that I could attend. I paid for it, and it paid off in spades. Is that a nice word to use now? Spades. It paid off. Yes, it paid off. And it wasn't so much that I learned about coaching, it's what I learned about myself and how I was showing up in the world and how people were engaging me and how I was engaging others. But then I got to see that in terms of the marketplace in DC in particular, there are lots of coaches, lots of coaches in DC. So the market is almost flooded, but there are not a lot of good coaches in DC, and that makes the difference. So it's a struggle, or it can be perceived as a struggle, to try to get an inroad so that someone will know your name, and that when there's an opportunity, they will call you versus someone else. So that's about building your brand when we're talking about building your brand. So think about it for a minute, because we're all talking about branding. What are some brands that stick out for you? Think about the marketplace. What are some brands that they stick out for you and you think that's a pretty good brand?
Miramax. Miramax.
Miramax.
Starbucks, Southwest Airlines.
Southwest. What sticks out for you for Southwest?
Pardon?
What sticks out for you for Southwest?
Luggage included.
Yeah, that's the major, prices and luggage.
No baggage fee.
And very courteous people, they do a great job, they
No
do good
unions.
service.
They give good service. Good service. Okay. Nike. Amazon. Yeah, I'm a little afraid of them right about now. They just follow food. I'm like, how's that going to work? Okay.
Ben and Jerry's.
Ben and Jerry's, Apple. These are all brands. When you think about the name, you think about the brand, what they look like, immediately comes to mind for you. Yeah.
Google.
Google is another brand. Exactly. So when you think about yourself, how do you want to brand yourself? What do you want to be? What's the number one thing that you want to be known for? Take a minute, ponder it, and write it down for yourself. You don't have to share it with us, but just take a minute. Actually, take 2 minutes. You're thinking about your personal brand. What do you want to be most known for? Got it? An idea? So now that you have it down, at your leisure, think about some things that you can do to promote that. What do you need to do? Do you need to come up with a tagline? Do you need to put it on your LinkedIn page? Do you need to put it on your Facebook page? There are various ways of getting your information out there. So do you have it on a business card? Do you have business cards? Yes.
I have business cards,
Mm-hmm.
and I have my LinkedIn is labeled
Mm-hmm.
with what my professional brand I want to be.
Okay. Do you want to share?
Yes, executive secretary,
Okay.
administrative assistant,
Okay.
a legal assistant,
Mm-hmm.
paralegal.
And everybody in DC needs one. And the other word that they use in DC that I found interesting is they call them chief of staffs. That's a word that they only use here in DC, I think. I was like, what? When my president came, he said, I want to create this new position. I'm like, okay, but you have an executive assistant. Well, I think he'd gone to a meeting, I think all of the presidents, CEOs wound up at one of their, powwows, and they were sharing, as they tend to do. And I think one too many shared that he or she had a chief of staff. And then mine came back saying that he wanted a chief of staff as well. I'm like, well, isn't that interesting? Well, let's work on that. I'm like, now what is that person going to do that's different from what your EA is doing to help him think it through? Because organizations are people. Let me just say that. Behind the title, they're people just like you and I, and they don't always know what it is that they want. Hence, the job proposal, as you're building out your brand, can be a very helpful thing to help them identify what it is that they truly want. Okay? Not a bad thing. And so in terms of preparing for the interview, there are different types of interviews. This is one of my, back in the day, Katie and Sarah. Katie prepared for the interview, but Sarah didn't. Hence the whole, what do you mean by what do I read? So back up a few, earlier in this conversation, I said you need to know something about the organization. So when you get there, and don't just quote what you read on their website. Act like you really know something about them and what it is that they need, and maybe they don't know all the intricacies about it, but when you're actually looking at the job description and you're creating your resume to match the job description, how many of you, take a pause, backing up, how many of you, when you're looking at the job description and creating the resume before you send it in, look at the job description and see that your resume, things that you're highlighting in your resume, match what's in the job description? Yeah. There's this program out there called JobScan. You familiar with it?
JobScan?
JobScan is a good tool. Okay, JobScan is one of those tools you can you can put in the position description or job description, however they're framing it up, and your resume, and it will highlight for you where your similarities or your skills are sticking out and aligned. I should say that's a better word, or where they're aligned with the others. So that's a good tool to use because oftentimes we're not seeing it. But again, if you're going to be a problem solver, and don't make them work that hard at reading resumes. If I'm getting a lot of resumes, I want to know quickly that you can do what I need you to do. Don't put it all the way down at the bottom, because in the first few paragraphs, I'm done. Just like if they're writing a good position description, the top 3 essential functions for that job, or should I say the key or the essential functions for their job, are the top 3 bullets.
I just recently sent a resume in, and what I did with my resume, right at the top, in the summary, I put in the top things they were wanting in that position. Yes. And then throughout the other part of the resume, I stuck it in wherever I knew that I had done those things in that position. Repetition is great.
How many of you have ever applied for a federal job with the federal government? Have you noticed if they ask you like 9 different times the same question all over again, and you're like, didn't I just answer that question for you? But they're looking to see if you're going to be consistent, and they're also looking for you to tell them when in your career history did you do that thing. And that's part of their strategy for asking you the same question more than one way. So if you're well versed in that, that also helps you build your brand. Make sense?
Yes. One of the things that I've been doing along the lines of what she said, it was suggested that I take a different approach. I'm looking for some different approaches. And one of the things that was suggested is in your cover letter, you do the same thing, only here's what they want, here's what you want, here's what I provide, and here's how I stack up with that.
Yeah, my cover letter, when I sent my cover letter, said, this is an introduction to me. I just made it brief because I understand they don't want long letters.
They don't want to work for it. And you know what? I'm okay with that because remember we were asking their headache?
I actually listed below that the things that they were looking for.
Yeah, I think that's important. And we want to make it easy for that person that's actually looking, because they're looking at a lot of people's information.
They get hundreds, thousands of resumes.
And some of them, like the federal government, have programs that will just immediately go through and scan for keywords. And if you don't have the keywords in your document, you don't get into the green light pit pop. Yes.
What's been happening with some of the federal government jobs is that they're limiting it to the first 100, 150.
Yeah,
They
that's
don't stop
right.
it after
They
that.
Can
are.
I say that again?
They'll stop. They'll only take the first 100, 150, and they'll stop it after that,
Mhm.
even if the job is open for 2 weeks.
Mhm.
So,
Back to her point earlier, the earlier you sign up for it, the higher the probability of your information being seen. Waiting to the last day, not so much.
The shorter the time it's open, the higher the probability that it's wired.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
true too.
You
if
can all-
it's
you
usually
can tell when it's
7
wired.
days, and if it's very specific.
Yeah.
But also, if you know people in the federal government and you're not on the cert list, you could have them review it.
Huh.
So,
Say
yeah.
that again?
Hmm?
If you're not.
If you're not on the cert list, like I applied for one, and people knew I was applying, and I did not make it, and they asked why. So they're having people review it. I'm like, I should be on
People
that
have
cert
gone
list.
back and
And so even if it's a federal government, if you know people,
Mhm.
use them, and if you get the job, I usually take them out for like really good.
Yes, say thank you in a very nice way. Say be a very, very nice way, thank you. I want to go back to something that Jen said about the cover letter. You want your cover letter to be just as specific as the resume targeted. So there's nothing wrong with targeting your cover letter just like you're targeting your resume, because that also helps build and promote your brand. And so you want to continue to think about those two things at the same time simultaneously. So how many of you are familiar with, yes?
The federal government doesn't use cover letters.
Some jobs they do. Some jobs they do. They have a format that they use, that they want to use, and sometimes they allow you to post your cover letter, and then for some jobs they don't. So it really depends. When I first moved here, I thought, okay, getting a job with the federal government is like a root canal, and I prefer not to have one. So I just bypassed them. It's like I can't with them because I don't want to go through a painful experience every time. But now, several years later, I'm just like, well, if it happens, it happens. If it doesn't, it doesn't. But, I'm looking for something very specific, so I don't apply for everything. I let someone in my network reach out and say, hey, I'm looking for someone that has these particular skills in the federal government, and then I'll go and apply. But just going on their website and applying, not so much. It's too much like a boot camp. Yes.
I've done hiring for the federal government, and I read most of my cover letters just because it's so monotonous when you're doing hundreds of resumes. So it gives me a break, and if I like what they're saying,
Mhm.
and also if I see typos, that's an automatic no.
Well, and I worked in a field where writing is critical.
Mhm.
So I wanted, without having to look at a lot of writing samples off the top, that's a separator that I use. If they write a good cover letter and they do a good job at it, that at least keeps them in, not going to eliminate them, it keeps them in the
Keeps them in the
pool.
loop, yes. Mhm.
I just last spring took a class with an HR person, retired from the federal government, but was in HR for 30 years.
Mhm.
And she would not discuss cover letters. She said they don't look at them, they don't care about them.
Mhm.
And so this, intensive 3-day class did not cover cover letters.
Really?
Yeah, she was
Interesting.
adamant that this was a waste of time and that anybody who writes a cover letter for the federal government is just going to be trashed.
Wow, interesting.
So that's where my information came from, because I think the cover letter is where your personality and your individual nature shines.
I do
you know,
too. I
And
do
it's so important.
And it's less scripted than the resume
Right.
itself, because it allows you to be more creative in terms of telling, this is what they need, this is what you've done, and this is how I can help you get to where you need to be. Because at the end of the day, that's what really matters. But in that division, what division, I'm just curious.
I think cover letters are not particularly useful until they are.
Mhm.
If you, sometimes they won't use them,
Mhm.
but sometimes they will. And if nothing else, I think going through the process helps prepare you for an interview if you
Mhm.
do get past that initial screening. So it helps you talk about yourself in a different context than your resume.
Yes.
And I think it does, if nothing else, kind of helps you organize your thoughts in a way that is going to present yourself.
And I like that. I like the way you frame that up, helping you organize your thoughts. If you haven't interviewed in a month of Sundays, and having a conversation about who you are and what you do and how you can be of benefit to someone, it may initially sound a little awkward. And I think we're conditioned to not toot our own horns. You know, it just sounds so self-serving if I say,
Well,
in the
like,
past,
it's like a lot of people, when they were growing up, they said, you don't brag about yourself.
Yeah.
But that's a disadvantage for anyone who's going job hunting.
yes.
You've got to be able to say great things about yourself, what you've done.
Well, more importantly, I'd add on to that, what I can do for you. I can do this
Yeah.
for you. I just heard in the news the other day, they were interviewing Nancy Pelosi, and someone said, oh, we think the leadership is old, they need to step down, and there's a new blood come in. And then the interviewer turned to Nancy Pelosi, are you prepared to step down? And Nancy, who's 40 plus,
right.
Nancy, who's 40 plus, she's in our group. She said, you know what? I knew that when I saw healthcare on the line, that I wanted to stay and support that. So I know you're not supposed to toot your own horn, but if I don't, who will? So anyway, I've done blah, and I'm like, you go, Nancy. Yeah, so she tooted her own horn. She talked about what it is that she can do.
Now, what you just said, I focused on the other piece of what you just said.
Mhm.
She said out her mouth, we don't want old fogies, we want young people. And then when the person challenged her and said, well, you step down because you're in the category of old fogies, she switched the subject.
Yes,
That's what I'm focused on, what you just said.
yes.
So that's like, that's no good. And the reality is one of the reasons, I believe the main reasons why people want the politically correct answer is, we want younger people because we can pay them less. No, we want younger people because they're more impressionable. They ask less questions, they do less intensive research. You can't fool a person who's been on the planet longer because they know more. So when some ridiculous policy in the organization is up there and a younger person's not going to challenge it because they don't have enough life experience to know about anything else to debate it. But an older person that has more experience, knows the industry better, can say, I don't know, somebody might came up with that idea, but that's really not going to work. I've been somewhere and I've seen someone do that and it failed or whatever. A young person can't do that. That's a better reason to have a younger person, to hire a younger person for the job than an older person. I don't want your level of experience, worldly knowledge. I want someone who's impressionable, that's easy to influence. They're going to buy the company line. They're not going to ask a bunch of questions.
So what do you do with that? When you get hit with that question, what do you do?
With what question exactly?
The question, and in this case, it could be a question, and the way it was proposed in the story that I just shared, the interviewer, the person doing the interview, asked Nancy, was she preparing to step down? Basically, was someone else had put out there, when you're older, we need you to, we want to see new blood in the administration, and they used that analogy to set up their question, Nancy, are you preparing to step down?
Well, then I'm prepared to come back and say, this is what I offer. This is what I can do for you.
And that's what she did. So my thing is to, and I think this is where Lynn was going, change the narrative. Turn the conversation around to what it is that you can do for them and why you would be a better fit. That my life experience will serve you. I can do blah, 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 blah. And it's not to say that millennials don't always challenge or don't challenge. Some of them do, some of them don't. So I'm not going to put them all in the same bucket. Some of us over 40, we like things done a certain way. I oftentimes say the persons that like change the least in an organization are HR people. They don't. They say they like change. They only like orchestrating the change because now they've been told what the change is going to be and then they get to manage the change. But for the most part, some of them are really like change averse. But if you have an opportunity to rewrite the narrative or shift the narrative in a way that's more positive for you, then that's what you want to be about. Sell your brand. Nike is out there, they've been on the scene for a while, and then Under Armour comes around and people are like, man, Under Armour not so much, because we got Nike, we got swoosh, and we got Michael Jordan. And Under Armour decided, you know what, I'm not stepping down, I'm not stepping back. I'm going to continue in this vein, and they came up with something that was specific about their brand, and now they're very competitive with Nike. Because I'm a runner, I happen to know, Nike wasn't really big in the all-weather clothing, but if you're running in the wintertime, I'm wearing Under Armour. Yeah, they have cool, warm, insulated wear. It's light, it's insulated, it's gonna keep you warm. I don't have to wear a lot of layers. That's my brand. Then Nike just realized, oh, I missed something. So then they started promoting it, but the first person to come out with it was Under Armour. Yeah. So you have to decide what it is about you that you want to sell. Hey, so what happened to our presentation? It timed out. Okay, let's see if I can get it back. Give me a minute. Didn't realize I forgot. Okay, so where I was asking is, are you familiar with the term behavioral style interviewing? Behavioral style interviews. Yes, what is that?
Behavioral style is when an interviewer is asking you what you would do in a certain situation.
Tell me about a time when.
A time, like one of the questions I got is when you get someone on the phone who is very unhappy about something that took place when he called before, and he's upset now about that situation. He calls and he's very unsatisfied with the customer service he received before. You have to actually, as a person who is taking the call, calmly say, I'm here to help.
Well, what they're looking for, if I can interrupt you for a second, they're looking for you to tell them a story about a time when you had a difficult customer, or you had to manage a difficult customer service situation, how you solved it. So here's one of my go-to questions. It's universal to everybody. This is the question I'm going to ask you. You're in an interview, and my question to you in the interview is this. Tell me about a time when you had an ethical dilemma. What was it, and what did you do? And if given an opportunity, what would you do differently? That's your question? And your response is? This is who wants to answer my interview question?
I'll answer your question. I'm going to be candid because it's this organization, but I don't know if I would be as candid. I would maybe pick a different scenario if I was answering an interview. But I had a student who I felt his parent was neglectful. And as an educator, I am a mandatory reporter for child abuse or neglect. And I was torn between the fact that he had a grandmother, he had a mother, he had an aunt, he had blood relatives who were in his life, although they were caring for him. My dilemma was, is he going to be better off in the social services system or foster care, which is the lesser of two evils. And I was only maybe 4 years in at that time, and I really should have collaborated, consulted with some of the social workers and counselors more, and I tried to make that decision by myself. And I decided to do nothing. And what I would do differently is, I really, in those situations, I'm trying to look for somebody else to take the weight and make the decision. One time I had a child who was being fed Prozac, a 4-year-old. I took the 4-year-old to the principal, and I was like, look at this baby. There's not that much wrong with her. Her mother's feeding an adult drug. It's not proven or recommended for adolescents.
Okay.
I'm an industry professional. As an expert in my industry, I should know what medications are typically prescribed for individuals with autism, special needs, whatever, and that's not one of them.
Okay.
So I took her to the principal to say, look, this baby, and I was also trying to say to the principal, hey, if this baby has a reaction to this drug, she jumps out the window, it's going to be on your watch. And I'm doing right by what I'm supposed to do and give you the heads up. She didn't do anything. She said, well, mother has a prescription.
Okay, so let me pause.
Wait a minute, let me just finish. I'm like, on the internet, anybody can get a prescription. So I'm bringing that up because these are the two stories that haunt me. This mother, is feeding this baby this drug. She might grow an extra head by the time she's an adolescent. And I took it to the leadership so the leadership could bear the weight, take the decision because it's happening in her facility. And she did nothing. And I never could figure out what I should have done.
Okay. So thank you for sharing. So what I heard when she started the answering of the question, the first scenario was around the child that the parent was neglectful. Do I leave the child there? Do I not leave the child there? Then I also heard you say what I could have done differently was ask someone more senior, collaborating with someone more senior in that role to give you some insight in terms of how to manage it. And that was good. And so you could have stopped right there. Then you gave a second scenario. And in your second scenario, the child that was being given an adult drug, and then the ethical, what you did there, is you did take it to leadership. But then you got to that whole blaming thing.
The leadership didn't do anything.
Yeah, but then just let me help you. So this is an interview, and I know I heard you also say these are the two that haunt me. So we're in an interview. So we want to come across with our best self. So we want to stop at the, I took it to leadership and I gave them some options.
Right.
Bam, just stop it right there.
Mm.
I gave them some options. And you're golden. You gave two great scenarios. When you're doing an interview, and the reason I ask that question is because it can be in any organization. Most people with life experience have had an ethical dilemma. Even the most junior person, this young lady had been in the workforce very long, and she was like, I don't know. So she told a story when she was in school, in college, and someone was cheating on an exam. And what did she do? And because they weren't cheating off of her paper, she decided to do nothing. That tells me something about her. So when you're answering a question, something to consider, you want to be candid in your response, which you were, Lynn. And that's, for some of us, it brings up memories. But, again, always present yourself in the best light. Tim.
Yeah, I'd like to get some more advice on that too, because sometimes these ethical dilemmas, the first thing I think of is a situation where maybe my boss was doing something that was misrepresenting to a customer, and you don't want to go into an interview and sort of throw your boss under the bus, kind of, but you want to say, this was a situation where this was occurring and I did this, but it almost feels like a no-win that no matter what you say, you've kind of incriminated your boss.
Actually, I don't think so. Because the question is, if it's a good interviewer and he or she has on their best listening ears, it's not about how your boss looks. The question is about, because remember when I asked the question, tell me about a time when you had an ethical dilemma. What did you do, and what would you do differently? So I asked a group of HR professionals a couple of days ago, and the young lady talked about the fact that you had a driver, and in this business they drive trucks, and the driver had a personal passenger in the back of his truck, a girlfriend, and that's against the rules, and so did nothing. It came to her attention, she did nothing. And then one of his subordinates had the daughter in the back of his truck, and that person got fired. Now she's aware of both. The first time she did nothing, but then she thought about it for a minute and said, you know what, this is coming across my desk a second time, I had to say something. So what that told me is, there's a risk involved, yes, because you were taking a risk. And when we're the subordinate, the best we can do is give our best advice, and it's upon the leader to decide. Yes, they're going to take it. No, they're not going to take it. That doesn't put you in a bad light. That just says what you did. And more importantly, if you had a teachable moment from that, it's like, you know what? The first time around, I was really looking for someone else to take the lead on it, and I should have consulted with someone else. That's a good response also, because you were new and you didn't know. But the more life experience you have, the more you know. Does that make sense? So when preparing for an interview, you also, I think, want to prepare your own questions. The interviewer is going to have questions. You want to prepare questions as well. Have 3 or 4 or 5. You decide. If they tell you the interview is going to be for an hour, then you decide how many more questions you're going to ask. Because if they're a good interviewer, in a good interview, the interviewer is doing less talking, and you, the interviewee, is doing the most talking. If you find that they're doing more talking, not good. They're telling their story. They don't know anything about you because I'm too busy yakking. I need to be listening to you. because it's about your story, not mine. Does that make sense? Yes. Philip.
So if you realize that it's not good, then what do you do?
Well, that's a good question.
I
And
know
so
that.
you don't have a lot of control in that, but what you can do is, because you prepared some good questions, ask your good questions. Like, so Sharron, I've heard a lot now, but I'm curious. Who does this position report to? And at the end of my first 90 days, what's going to be expected of me in terms of results? You have good questions. If they don't have good questions, you have good questions. And then they're going to more than likely, it's like, oh, that's a good question. I'm like, I know it is, because I'm a good person. You need to
How
hire
did
me.
you ask that question?
How did I answer that question?
Ask that question.
How did I ask that question? I used my name, so I was the interviewer.
Yes.
I said, Sharron, I've been listening to you for a while, so I'm going to report to the head of finance. So I'm curious, what are the results that I'm going to be responsible for at the end of the first 90 days? What does good look like? What's going to be expected of me? Because in most organizations, they have what they call, excuse me, they used to call it probationary period, but we've advanced and we don't call it that anymore. We call it an introductory period. And it's typically 90 days. And that first in 90 days, that first introductory period, I'm learning about you, you're learning about me. And usually, some organizations, if they're formal enough, they'll actually do an evaluation for you at the end of the first 90 days. Sound familiar? Anybody had a company or employer that did that? Instead of waiting for the whole year to come around, they do it at the end of the first 90 days, kind of like a check-in. How are things going, Sharron? You see on that first day?
I would, as an employee, as a new employee, I would want to know how I stand after 90 days. Am I meeting their expectations?
Yes, and the best way to know that is before you get to the end of the 90 days, ask me at the beginning of the 90 days, what does good look like for you? Because if not, I'm working on something that's probably totally off your radar. If you have some kind of report that you want me to generate, if you have some type of analysis that you want me to do, whatever the case may be, I need to know that on day 1 as opposed to day 90 when I didn't come through for you.
Yes, so this workshop is about personal branding, and there was some conversation about LinkedIn. So one of the questions that I sort of had in my mind as I'm developing who I am and what my brand looks like is, I'm promoting my brand, maybe and myself, like as a consultant, even if I don't use that word. My LinkedIn profile I may negotiate in such a way that it's like, oh, this is someone I can speak to directly and hire. She's not working for you in the organization. How does that look if I'm also using that same profile to attract employers? Would it be a conflict that it's like, well, she says she wants to come work for us, but she also looks like she's trying to do business with herself? How does that play out?
So, I think it's time to tell the story during the interview. So they're
I'm
going
talking
to
about the LinkedIn profile. I'm talking about the social media things they're going to look at before I get to the interview.
Before you actually get to the interview. So that's where you're drawing that line in the sand.
I don't want to look completely like a consultant because then it looks like I'm looking for contractual work. I'm not looking for someone to hire me in a position in their organization that's salary. So I don't want to look too much like I'm in business for myself, because I still want the people who might hire me to work for them as a salary career employee with benefits. You know, I don't want them to be turned off from that. So I think I'm very far down the road with getting closer to who my brand is, but my LinkedIn page and my Facebook page are not live yet and up because that's where I am. It's like, okay, I want people to look at me to hire me to work for them, but I also want to, for connections and stuff, somebody might say, well, this, you know, she looks like she got a lot of skills, you know, working with young people. I know somebody needs somebody.
I think I would sell my skills and my experience as opposed to putting any verbiage.
I'm just saying there's a conflict with employers, like, can they get a whiff that?
Not all the time. No, I think most of the time they're looking at the skills and the experience.
Some things to watch out for to stay away from.
I would stay away from saying I'm looking for a specific job in. I would focus on my skills and my experience and let that be the lead. And then they can draw whatever conclusion, because if they don't see something, when they reach out to you, they're going to contact you and they're going to ask you about it, and then you get to share your story. Yes. Okay. Thank you. Yes. Does that help, Lynn?
Yes.
Okay. Philip.
Yeah. reference to the ethical situation. I just like to get maybe some perspective regarding scenarios such as, because I did a brief stint in human resources. And I realized that there are times that the human resource person can be caught between the rock and the hard place. There are policies there on the books that management say, carry out these policies and make sure that the employees are happy. You make your job is to make sure that employees are happy. But then at the same time, when there is something that management want for themselves, aside from that policy or that would contravene or contradict what the policy says, then you who's supposed to implement that, in between.
So what's your question? Help me ask. What's your question?
The question is, as an HR person, how do you reconcile such a situation? You have bosses who verbally,
I got it.
Verbally,
I got it.
they don't
So my
want.
answer to that is this: having worked in human resources for a very long time, know who you are, know yourself, own your own values. Your employer doesn't own your values; you own your values. And for me, and I can only speak for me, I draw the line with not doing anything that's illegal and unethical, and I tell the truth. So as your HR person, my job, I am your I'm your internal consultant. So my job is to provide you with options. And I'm going to lay out for you, this is what the law says, and this is what the policy says. And what the policy says, does it align with the organizational mission and values? Yes or no? You, Mr. President, get to decide. When I'm giving you your options, if you go down this road, you might wind up in HR jail, as I love to refer to it. If you go down this road, you may wind up in opposition with the internal workforce and our internal culture. But it's really up to you. So an example of what that looks like, when my boss president came in and said he wanted a chief of staff, when he already had an executive assistant, and our policy said that we post all jobs, make them available internally for 3 days, and he did not want to do that. So I reminded him what the policy is, what our organizational culture is, and asked him how did he want to proceed. And he was very uncomfortable with my line of questioning. And he got up and left. That was on a Friday. Things happen on Fridays. On Monday, he came back by and apologized. He said, that's okay. I asked you the same questions I asked any other manager, but tell me, what do you want to do? He wanted to give her the job. It's like, okay, no problem. So when an employee, because I knew it was going to happen, came in and said, well, how did so-and-so get that job? That's a very good question. Leave here, make a right turn, office at the end of the hallway with the big window, ask that person. Honest, not doing what's illegal and unethical. Okay, so my thing timed out again. I don't have time. So the picture that was up there before is, it said STAR, have a STAR resume. You want to be strategic, specific, action, and results. Okay, when you're creating a resume, you want to be able to quantify the things that you've done, demonstrate some results, and put up some metrics beside them, because that makes a difference when you're creating your resume. And again, it tells the reviewer what you've done and how well you've done it. Like, you saved the organization, XYZ amount of money, you reduced overhead by XYZ amount, whatever the case may be. It's up to you. You brought in a project underneath in a shorter time frame, but you want to build your resume, which is also building your brand, and that can be a part of what's on your LinkedIn page in terms of how you're presenting yourself. Make sense? Question or comment? So I'm running out of time. You have been a good group. Can you pull it back up for me while I do this? So, just for some tips, a career changers checklist. Something, like, I killed some more trees for you, I'm sorry. And then a little information on Fast Company is a magazine that oftentimes puts out great information, and this one is on the brand called Heal. I thought you might find it interesting. So before, yes, now's the time to just be quiet and let you ask whatever questions you like. Yes.
No, I just want to remind everybody that Glassdoor is a really great place to look for culture. And
Yeah,
that's right, Glassdoor can be really helpful to see the comments.
Glassdoor
have to
is
take
a-
it with a grain of salt, but I think it's.
I agree with you. That is another great place to get information on the organization, the people that work there. I heard Eric say earlier in that formal class that they have that goes for I'm not sure how many weeks, but they talked about your elevator speech, your 2-minute elevator speech, and we should all have one. Okay, you get to practice it. You get to practice it when you go out just hanging out. But practice what that actually looks like. Yes.
I'm attending a career fair on Thursday, and all those participants, those employees I may not be interested in, but I can go there and talk about my experience and my education as well as my skills, and
And promote yourself.
yeah, promote.
So Toastmasters, anywhere where you can go that will give you an opportunity to practice your elevator speech or your 2 minutes. Don't overshare. Don't tell them about your grandkids or your daughter or your son or whatever. Don't throw your boss underneath the bus. I had a horrible employer. Those aren't the things that they want to hear. They really keep in mind, to Gina's point, they have a headache, you're their advocate. Always be on target, be prepared to be a problem solver. And I've learned that more listening is critical as opposed to not. And be prepared to share. It's like storytelling. Be prepared. Know what your story is, and your story becomes your brand. So Eric is standing here, so that tells me I've run out of time. I hope this has been helpful, and thank you for participating. And this is it.
Thank you very much, Sharrón.